for nearly 3 decades. He lives a simple life in rural Wheeler Hill in the northwest portion of the Susquehanna watershed, and often goes out on the poetic road across America sharing his creativity. He will be speaking on making room for spontaneity. We will follow the sermon with a moment of silence for those who wish to reflect.
Thank you, Brian. It's always wonderful to be here. It's great to see you all and work through the technology problems. Before I get talking about that, I want to say hello, Beth, and thank you for, I guess it sounds like you put together the slideshow. I love all the bird photos. All these different birds, and I was identifying most of them, but really nice to see that. And somebody said punch in the face. Who said that one? You did, okay? You said punch in the face, right? And that immediately made me think of something. Jesse, where's Jesse? I'll tell you the story, okay? Jesse and I have the same car, basically. I've got a 2011 Malibu, yours is 2010, and, parked right next to me again, and so there's those two cars. And the reason I thought of punch in the face, I don't know if you've had this problem, but the headlights will go out sometimes, the bulb. And the way to change a headlight with the Malibu, it's not simple. So I went online to check YouTube, and the very first YouTube I saw, it started out with these words: "Whoever designed this should get a punch in the face." So anyway, so it had to do with the Malibu, right? And I think I agree with him too. You got to take all sorts of stuff off just to get to the light. It's like, okay, spontaneity. I mentioned earlier with the all family thing, just that I think we think too much. We think too much. How many of you feel you think too much? Raise your hand. I'm just curious. Yeah. Don't we almost all do that? We think too much. One of my poems, there's a line in there: "When thinking, don't. When feeling, do." And I really do feel we think too much. And I've been writing poetry for 50-something years now, but for the last 10 years, I've had a daily practice. And that daily practice is I write every day a spontaneous poem. And I have actually two daily practices that bookend my days. In the morning, I get up and I make a pot of tea, and I set my timer for 73 seconds. And I pour the first cup of tea, start the timer, and I look at that cup of tea and I think of some other person in my life and put energy towards that person. And it's a wonderful way for me to start the day thinking of other. But then the end of the day, just before going to bed, everything else will be done. I'll sit there by the computer and wait for a poem to come. And I don't think ahead of time about what I might write about or anything. I just let it come. And it's really a fascinating practice for me, and I never know what's going to come. And often in the morning, I won't remember what I wrote because it was just spontaneous and in the moment. So I want to read, a few of the spontaneous poems, and also the idea of spontaneity is similar to Wu Wei, the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, which is, and let me read a poem about that. How many of you are familiar with Wu Wei, the concept of Wu Wei? Yeah, and it's sort of like a simplified version to go with the flow, but it's more than that. It's not just that. And this is a spontaneous poem that came to me just a week or so ago, a couple of weeks ago. Misunderstanding Wu Wei is like being in canoe, riding river current wherever it takes you. that could lead to disaster. Understanding Wu Wei means paddling, guiding canoe with current, paddling when needed, guiding canoe to where it can go with the flow safely. Not no action, but proper action when needed. And so often people think Wu Wei is just go with the flow, whatever. But it's really a matter, how do you go with the flow with some guided action, like in a canoe? You can't just let the river take you wherever. You know, you need to work with that flow and that. There's a writer, and I don't know if, you know, I've been coming here doing services for, when were we in the Montessori? How long have you been at the church here? 2010. I know there were a few times I was at the Montessori, so it goes back quite a ways, right? And I think I maybe did a program once about a writer, David Grayson. I'm not sure if I did, but he's somebody nobody knows anymore. And he changed my life, and I won't go into who he was. His real name was Ray Baker, a journalist, a muckraker from the turn of the century. But he wrote these other books under the name David Grayson, which really changed my life. And if you think of it, look into him. And some of his books are free online from the, you know, Gutenberg, or the out of, in public domain they're in. But one of his chapters was called "Follow Your Nose." And he went out one day, where should I go? And it was springtime. And you know how spring and the smells, and it just went around and out into the swamp and all different places, but just being spontaneous. Where's my nose going to take me? And it's a wonderful chapter. And I write a lot of haiku, and haiku, I feel, is very spontaneous too, in the way I write it. If I'm writing haiku, I'll go outside, and it's what grabs me. What are my senses picking up? And another practice I do is photography. Every day, I miss this a bit, but I post a new photograph on Facebook, and that daily spontaneous poem I post on Facebook. And when I go out with my camera, I won't have any preconceived notions of what I want to take a picture of. It's usually outdoors. I'll just go, and what's grabbing me? You know, what's grabbing my interest? What's something that I didn't notice before that I'm just suddenly seeing, you know? And I think that's, I love doing that. I went to Sweden recently, and I never left America till 3 years ago. My good friend Craig Chury, some of you know Craig Chury, but he always, Michael, you got to get out of America. You got to go out of America, you know, and I finally did 3 years ago for the first time, and I've gone somewhere each of these years. And this year I went to Sweden, and it was very special because I was going to visit a dear person in my life I hadn't seen for 51 years, you know, which is like, wow, 51 years. It was a woman I met in my hitchhiking days, way back in Boston. I could go on and talk about that, but I won't. But it was meaningful in the sense that actually it was the first time both of us made love. And, you know, that's special. That's memorable. So anyway, I was going to Sweden to see her again. And a few different friends asked, well, what are you expecting? What are you expecting? And I go, nothing. Just go and see what happens. You know, and it was beautiful. It was wonderful. And just a funny little story, I got to Stockholm, and, you know, off the plane, you go in line to the customs, you know, and you have to see a customs agent, and I'm in line, and it was the line I was in, it was a woman customs agent. And the people ahead of me took a long time. I go, oh, this might have been the wrong line. You know, she's going to really grill me or whatever. I don't know. So I get up and I hand her my passport, and she looks there and she goes, oh, and what's your reason for coming to Sweden? And I said, well, I'm coming to meet a dear friend, and I haven't seen her for 51 years, someone special in my life. She goes, oh, wow. Go ahead, go. It's like, it was like, yeah, that was a spontaneous response from me. I wasn't planning that. And we have expectations too much sometimes. You know, when you have expectations, you also often have disappointments. You know, and if you could just flow, just go with no expectations, and that's not easy at all. But and here's a poem that came when I was in Sweden. These eyes that see Sweden, sights new, different, exciting because of newness, are same eyes that see what's back home, not as exciting. I need to take these Stockholm eyes back with me, try to see familiar as new, different, exciting as if never seen before. You know, and how often we just take our familiarity things for granted and we stop seeing them. And talking about children, has anyone ever gotten excited here, like in spring, to see the first dandelion? Some people do. Good, because kids always get to go, oh, the dandelion, you know, how kids can be and the dandelion. But sometimes we tend to forget that, you know, we tend to, oh, it's a dandelion, you know. How do you see with, like I call this, someone said, oh, that sounds like the title of a song, Stockholm Eyes, you know, it's like, but you know, I came back home, how can I look at this familiarity as if I've never seen it before? You know, and then just see what happens, pretend you've never been there before. Pretend that person, you didn't know them and you're getting to know them. Trying to stay present in this moment. Who knows how many more moments might we have in this life? And when we plan things too much, when we expect things, it's like it closes off a lot of other things, I think, in our life. And when I travel, you know, I do travel around America a lot as a poet, go on tours. A lot of times I just don't even make plans where I'm going to be for the night and just see what happens. I'll give a reading and I'll talk about an experience that I had a long time ago where I bartered books for a room in a motel. And I did that on this first cross-country trip in 1996. And I'll often tell that story and then say, you know, I don't have any plans for tonight. Anyone have a spare bedroom, a couch? I'll trade a few books, you know. And it's been wonderful, the people I've gotten to meet that way, and never a negative experience either. And that spontaneity, I think, you know, it goes back to like the hitchhiking days. I spent 3 years off and on traveling about 30,000 miles hitchhiking. And I always went east because everyone was going west back then. You know, everyone was going to the Rockies or California. I went the other way, you know, I went the other way, the Adirondacks, New England, Nova Scotia. And I really never had specific plans and just let things happen as they do. And it led to some just wonderful experiences that I would not have had if I had things planned. My wife just went on a tour to Ireland, 2-week tour. She had a great time, wonderful time. I wouldn't go. I don't, you know, why would I go on a tour? I mean, that's my feeling, you know, besides the cost of it. It's like when I've gone overseas, I'll just go and wander, walk streets, you know, say hi to people, share a poem on the street sometimes with people, and just let happen what happens. And it was a little strange in Sweden, though. Has anyone here ever been to Sweden? People do not say hi to you. You walk on the street, nobody looks at you. They're just very, very self-focused in the sense that you don't talk to strangers. You don't say hi. So that was strange because I love saying hi to people. And like I said, telling a poem on the street to somebody maybe. And that was different in Sweden. So trying to have those spontaneous experiences in Sweden just by walking around and bumping into somebody, it was much more difficult because it wasn't like a reciprocal thing, you know? But where I mentioned about bartering for rooms, one of the spontaneous poems from Sweden again, another place becoming another home. As Dogen was one of the Zen masters, I think from the 11th or 12th century. As Dogen said, where every step I take is my home. I concur. This Stockholm home, another in so many homes, as I traveled for so many years, traveled over so many miles, so many homes to be going home to. And I love that quote, where every step I take is my home. And even when it's bartering and I'm staying in someone's house I've never met before, it's like, that's home. That's home. Or sleeping in a field, that's home. Yeah. Yeah. No expectations, no disappointments. What happens is what happens. Being present now affects what happens now. What we want to happen rarely comes to pass. Too much trying, too much desire. Be present now, in flow of what's happening. What's meant to happen will. If not now, when? When? These words just flow out. No preconceived thought, no worked over lines. Whatever comes, comes of itself, just like these words written just now. And when we think too much, it's like you can get bogged down, and my poetry, I do write poetry otherwise besides spontaneous poems, and then I do revise and that, but that's different. The spontaneous poem is a practice, and I think we should let go. I think, how many of you could just go somewhere and without plans, do you think? Just go and, hey, I want to go hit the road and just see what comes, and that's fascinating because you just never know what's going to come. And I know some people, it's difficult to do that, want to be in control, but I think it's great to lose control sometime. Ah, that's true. That's true. But, and I know it can be difficult out there, and being solo maybe, and that it can be difficult maybe at times. But I think there's ways you can probably work around that and be okay too, Yeah. So I'm just curious, any questions? I haven't usually done that. I said, any questions? Anyone have any questions? Yes, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Is that okay doing that? Yeah, okay. I guess. Okay, great. I love questions. I always feel the best way. I used to do a lot of poet in residence work in schools, and I would always tell the kids, best way to learn is to ask questions, So yes.
My question is, have you always been spontaneous, or did it take discipline to become that way?
Have I always been? No, I haven't always been. And I think it was a process. And I'm going to go back to the name I mentioned earlier, David Grayson. He really changed my life, his writing, very simple. And I learned of him from a Chinese writer, Lin Yu Tang, who wrote a book called The Wisdom of America and many other books. And it was a survey of American literature from a Chinese perspective. And he had examples of writing, throughout American history. And the writer he held highest was this person called David Grayson, who I didn't know who he was. But he opened me up to other people and to other experiences from what he wrote. And that would have been in the late 70s when that happened. But it was a slow process, But I remember the first time I had an experience after reading his works, and I had this experience, connecting with this other person. And afterwards I thought, Oh, thank you, David Grayson. I did that because of reading your work and how you related. So it was a process. And, I think also the older you get, or at least for me, I only can speak for myself, but the older you get, the more less inhibited you get, the more maybe confidence you get in who you are as a person. Again, I'm just speaking for myself. And I think the more confidence you get, the less inhibited opens you up to those different experiences and being not so rigid, not so rigid. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions at all? Yes.
So, less so about spontaneity and more so poem writing. Do you ever go back and rework your poems or reread them and add to them?
Once in a while. Once in a while. I know there's some poets who continually revise even old poems, and that I feel at some point they become an artifact. They become an artifact. One of my collections is selected poems, and some of them go back to the 70s. I could maybe rewrite those poems from where I am now, but no, they're artifacts. They are representative of that time period. One of my latest book is a memoir. It's one long poem, 100 pages, becoming who I needed to be. And in that, as I'm writing through, the memoir, I have some of the contemporaneous poems that I wrote here and there from that, time frame. And, two of them go back to the 70s. And I wouldn't write that poem today, but it was what I did then, and it's an artifact now. So I don't like to I'll revise usually in the moment or, shortly after the poem was written or if it's recent, but then at some point, no, it's done. I know Donald Hall, a major American poet, I was at a reading of his, and he read this poem from his newest book. And he goes, let me tell you about the poem. I remember writing it and revising it. And I sent it out to a journal with other poems that got published. Then I revised it again. And then it's in this book, it's hardcover. And he goes, even as I read it now, I changed it. So he kept, I think, no, for me, they become artifacts. Yeah. So any other questions? Yes, Jim.
Okay. Right next to me. Mike, it's good to see you again. I didn't know you were going to be here today. Well, my question is is there a certain point in your life where you can pinpoint the time you decided to embrace spontaneity, or were you born spontaneous?
Certain point in my life, no, I can't say that there was a specific experience, that where I decided to embrace that. It was a process. It was a process, a slow process. Like I said, starting with David Grayson encouraging me, even though I don't think he's ever I don't know if he ever wrote the word spontaneity in his writing, but just how he related with life was spontaneous. No, it was a process, I think. And I've incorporated it to be a big part of my life, I'd say in the last 10 years or so, maybe, so, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Do you have a favorite poem?
Of mine or others or of mine? Well, I'm going to, and I know some of you have heard this poem before, but I'm going to recite it again anyway, because of all the bird photos that were on the slides. And it's called Seeing Eye to Eye, nothing to do with, well, no, it is spontaneous because this was a spontaneous act. And it's called Seeing Eye to Eye with the Chickadee. And how many of you have fed birds by hand? Anybody feed chickadees by hand? Yeah. I went out to feed them by hand one day and I did something different. And this is what I did. Seeing eye to eye with the chickadee. I know it's just for food you come. That's okay. It all gets down to food anyway, one way or another. Yet when I tip back my head, lay a few seeds in my beard, hear you call, dee-dee, dee-dee, then flutter just above my eyes, feel your feet grasp my beard as you peck down for a seed, then fly off to a nearby tree to eat, and return again and again. I think maybe there's something more than just a few black oil sunflower seeds between us. Who knows? Hey, come spring, I'll let you build a nest with my hair if you'd like. So, thank you. Thank you.